Welcome back, listeners, to Whispers of the White House, where we dive deep into the hidden layers of historical figures we thought we knew. I'm your host, Dr. Wisdom, and today we're turning the spotlight on one of America's most revered First Ladies, Eleanor Roosevelt, and the woman who shared an intimate and perhaps secret relationship with her, journalist Lorena Hickok. Now, this relationship has stirred quite a bit of speculation over the years. Were Eleanor and Lorena just close friends? Or, as their deeply affectionate letters suggest, was there something more? We're going to explore the evidence, dive into the letters, and try to understand this relationship that's been the subject of both admiration and controversy. Before we begin, remember my other two shows, Tales on the Couch and The Wisdom of Sex. If you like true crime stories in less than 10 minutes, you'll enjoy Tales on the Couch. Or, if you want to explore the complexities of love and relationships, tune into The Wisdom of Sex with yours truly, Dr. Wisdom. All three shows are available on all major podcast platforms. Okay, let's get started. So let's set the stage. The year is 1933, and Eleanor Roosevelt becomes First Lady of the United States, a role that, up to that point, had been largely ceremonial. Society's expectations for women were rigid. They were seen as homemakers and caretakers, meant to support their husbands and keep a tidy household. But Eleanor Roosevelt had no intention of playing by those rules. She didn't just reshape the role of First Lady, she redefined it entirely. Eleanor saw the position as a platform for political change. She wasn't content to be a symbol, she wanted to be a voice, and her most powerful tool was visibility. She became Franklin's eyes and ears, traveling to places where he couldn't go. Remember, Franklin had been paralyzed from the waist down by polio, and while he could still move around with leg braces, traveling to coal mines, farms, and labor camps wasn't feasible for him. So Eleanor went in his place. She visited coal miners' homes, talked to farmers during the Dust Bowl, and met with working-class families who had lost everything in the Great Depression. She didn't just listen, she felt their pain. She reported it back to Franklin in vivid detail, often urging him to take action. Her impact didn't end there. Eleanor was also a media powerhouse. She wrote a daily newspaper column called My Day, where she discussed everything from civil rights to labor rights to human rights. Think of it as a modern-day blog, but one that reached millions of readers every single day. It wasn't just fluff either. She tackled political issues head-on, championing the New Deal and criticizing policies she felt were unjust. But here's the revolutionary part. Eleanor held her own press conferences, and she only allowed women reporters to attend. This forced newspapers to hire female journalists just to have access to her briefings. This move created career opportunities for women in journalism that didn't exist before. Eleanor knew that access is power, and she used it to empower women in media. She wasn't a passive First Lady. She was an activist, a journalist, and an advisor to the President of the United States. Every First Lady since Eleanor, Nancy Reagan, Laura Bush, Michelle Obama, even Jackie Kennedy and Melania Trump, owes part of their legacy to Eleanor Roosevelt. All right, so we know that Eleanor Roosevelt redefined what it meant to be First Lady, but let's talk about one of her most controversial and courageous contributions, her support for civil rights. This was the 1930s and 1940s. Segregation was still legal in much of the country, and Franklin Roosevelt needed the support of Southern Democrats to pass his New Deal policies. Franklin had to tread lightly on civil rights to avoid alienating those Southern lawmakers. But Eleanor? She had no patience for silence. One of her most famous acts of defiance was her role in the Marian Anderson concert controversy. Here's what happened. In 1939, Marian Anderson, a world-renowned black opera singer, was denied permission to perform at Constitution Hall in Washington, D.C., because she was black. The Daughters of the American Revolution, DAR, controlled the venue, and they wouldn't budge. When Eleanor found out, she did something no one expected. She resigned from the DAR, not quietly, not behind the scenes, publicly. She sent them a letter, which was published for the whole world to see. In it, she said in so many words that she could not, in good conscience, remain part of an organization that discriminated based on race. But she didn't stop there. Eleanor worked with Secretary of the Interior Harold Ickes to arrange for Marian Anderson to perform at the Lincoln Memorial instead. This wasn't just any concert. It was a concert attended by 75,000 people and broadcast on the radio for millions to hear. This moment became a symbol of the civil rights movement long before Martin Luther King Jr.'s I Have a Dream speech, and it happened because Eleanor Roosevelt took a stand. But this wasn't the only time she used her influence for civil rights. She was a vocal supporter of anti-lynching laws. She lobbied Congress. She invited Black leaders like Mary McLeod Bethune to the White House, something that had never been done before. She knew her presence mattered. She knew her witness mattered, and she made sure that people in power saw it. Now, we've seen Eleanor's independent influence on the world stage, but let me ask you this. Could Franklin D. Roosevelt have been the president he was without Eleanor Roosevelt? The answer, I believe, is no. Eleanor didn't just support Franklin, she strengthened him. Let me explain. Franklin Roosevelt contracted polio in 1921, leaving him paralyzed from the waist down. It was a devastating blow to a man with presidential ambitions. For a while it seemed like his career was over, but Eleanor believed in him even when he didn't believe in himself. She became his bridge to the outside world. While Franklin was recovering, she kept his political contacts alive, went to political events on his behalf, and proved to him that life wasn't over. Once he was president, she became his most trusted advisor, not because she had to be, but because she earned it. Eleanor's daily reports from her travels shaped his policies. Her advocacy for the poor and marginalized communities made Franklin's New Deal more human. Without Eleanor, FDR's New Deal might have looked a lot more like cold, hard economic policy. With Eleanor's influence, it became a policy about people. One historian put it this way: Eleanor Roosevelt wasn't the wind beneath FDR's wings, she was the wings. But it wasn't always smooth sailing. Eleanor didn't hesitate to challenge Franklin. She openly criticized his failure to support anti-lynching laws and challenged his reluctance to push for stronger civil rights. She never backed down, even when it made him uncomfortable. That's not just love, that's leadership. Franklin once said, "No one who has met Eleanor Roosevelt can ever forget her." Well, I think it's safe to say that no one who studied Eleanor Roosevelt can forget her either. But behind this groundbreaking public figure was a private world of emotional complexity. Her marriage to Franklin was, by most accounts, a political partnership more than a romantic one. After discovering Franklin's affair with Lucy Mercer in 1918, Eleanor was devastated, and their marriage was never the same. While they maintained public appearances and supported each other politically, Eleanor began to forge emotional connections outside the marriage. And that's where Lorena Hickok comes in, a brash, no-nonsense journalist for the Associated Press. Lorena, or Hick as she was called, was assigned to cover Eleanor during FDR's first presidential campaign. But what started as a journalist-subject relationship soon turned into something much more profound. For the next 30 years, Lorena would become one of Eleanor's closest confidants, and, as many believe, one of the great loves of her life. Now here's where things get interesting. While we don't have a full account of their private conversations, we do have their letters. Over 3,000 of them. These letters span decades, and they reveal a closeness and emotional depth that is hard to ignore. Let me read you some of the most famous excerpts. This is from a letter Eleanor wrote to Lorena in 1933. "Hick, darling, I can't go to bed tonight without a word to you. I felt a little as though a part of me was leaving tonight. You have grown so much to be a part of my life that it is empty without you, even though I'm busy every minute." The following day, Eleanor wrote, "Hick, darling, how good it was to hear your voice. It was so inadequate to try and tell you what it meant. Funny was that I couldn't say je t'aime and je t'adore as I longed to do, but always remember that I am saying it, that I go to sleep thinking of you. These expressions of longing and affection suggest a bond that was both profound and essential to Eleanor's emotional well-being." Lorena Hickok's letters to Eleanor are equally revealing, showcasing her deep affection and the solace she found in their relationship. In December 1933, Lorena wrote, "I've been trying to bring back your face, to remember just how you look. Funny how even the dearest face will fade away in time. Most clearly, I remember your eyes, with a kind of teasing smile in them, and the feeling of that soft spot just northeast of the corner of your mouth against my lips. These words aren't the kind of thing you'd expect to hear from one friend to another, at least not by today's standards. In other letters, Eleanor expresses how much she misses Lorena, sometimes to the point of physical longing. Her words drip with affection, and she often signed off with phrases like, I miss you terribly, or I long to see you. So let's get to the question you're all wondering. Was it romantic? The truth is, it's complicated. Let me set the scene. Eleanor Roosevelt and Lorena Hickok met in 1932 during Franklin D. Roosevelt's first presidential campaign. Lorena, or Hick as Eleanor called her, was one of the most prominent female journalists in the country. She was independent, sharp-tongued, and completely unafraid to challenge authority. Eleanor was drawn to her almost immediately. At first, their relationship was professional. Hick was covering Eleanor's campaign efforts, but over time, it became personal. And I'm not just talking about professional admiration. I'm talking about late-night phone calls, daily letters, and confessions of longing. Here's where things get interesting. We have over 3,500 letters that they exchanged, and let me tell you, they are intense. They're filled with words like, I can't wait to hold you, I miss you terribly, and I go to sleep thinking of you. Now, I'm no historian, but if you're writing that to someone, that sounds a lot like love to me. One of the most famous letters from Eleanor to Hick reads like this. Hick, darling, I miss you so much. I want to put my arms around you and kiss you at the corner of your mouth. Okay, pause right there. Kiss you at the corner of your mouth? That's not exactly something most people say to a friend. It's tender, it's intimate, and it's vulnerable. But it doesn't stop there. Here's another letter. I wish I could lie down beside you tonight and take you in my arms. Now I know what you're thinking. That sounds like a love letter. And you wouldn't be alone in that thinking. Historians like Lillian Faderman have argued that Eleanor and Hick's relationship was, in fact, a romantic love affair. But here's the twist. Some scholars, like Blanche Wiesen-Cook, argue that the language of love between women was different back then. In the 1930s, it wasn't uncommon for close female friends to express affection in ways that might sound romantic to our modern ears. Women had fewer outlets for emotional intimacy, especially within marriage, so they found solace in each other. It's what some historians call a romantic friendship. So, was it friendship or love? Here's where it gets complicated. Let's talk about what Lorena did for Eleanor, because this is where things move from emotional intimacy to something more material and real. If this relationship was just friendship, then we need to ask a very important question. Why did Lorena Hickok give up her entire career for it? Let me break it down. Hick was a rising star in journalism. She was a political reporter for the Associated Press. Back then, that was a huge deal for a woman. She was known for her hard-hitting stories, sharp questions, and no-nonsense approach to power. Her career was on the rise. But in 1933, she gave it all up. Why? To be closer to Eleanor. She left journalism and took a government job in the New Deal administration, one that kept her physically close to Eleanor in Washington, D.C. And it wasn't just about work. She moved into the White House. Yes, you heard that right. Lorena Hickok lived in the White House for a time, in a room just down the hall from Eleanor. If that doesn't tell you how close they were, I don't know what does. But here's the part that really tugs at your heart. Lorena loved Eleanor deeply, and there's evidence to suggest that she may have been the love of Lorena's life. In one letter, Hick wrote, I can't ever be angry with you no matter what you do. You are the light in my life, and I will always be here for you. That, my friends, is love. It wasn't just the words, it was her actions. She gave up her dream career to be near Eleanor. She lived in the White House. She accepted a lesser role in the New Deal administration just so she could stay close. Now ask yourself, would you give up your life's dream to be closer to a friend? Some of you might say yes, but most of us would only make that kind of sacrifice for love. All right, so we've talked about what Lorena did for Eleanor, but let's flip it. What did Eleanor get from this relationship? Here's the thing. Eleanor Roosevelt was under constant pressure. She wasn't just the First Lady, she was one of the most visible women in the world. People watched her every move, criticized her appearance, and scrutinized her words. She was expected to be perfect, strong, and endlessly compassionate. But with Hick, Eleanor could just be Eleanor. Their letters reveal a softer side of Eleanor. She's not the public figure in those letters. She's vulnerable, lonely, and in need of love. And isn't that something we can all relate to? Sometimes we just need someone who sees us, not the role we play, but the person we are underneath. That's what Lorena Hickok was for Eleanor Roosevelt. She was someone Eleanor could write to at night, pour out her heart, and not feel judged. Someone who saw her as Eleanor, not the First Lady. And that emotional support mattered. It gave Eleanor the strength to face the world. Without Hick's love, Eleanor might not have been able to show up for the nation in the way that she did. Regardless of the nature of their relationship, one thing is clear. Eleanor and Lorena gave each other something they desperately needed: emotional refuge. One of the most famous collections of letters is known as the Monticello letters. Written when Eleanor was away from Washington, these letters reveal her deep yearning for Lorena's company. Her letters express longing and tenderness, and at times, they almost read like poetry. It's in these moments of distance that the depth of their connection becomes most clear. So what do we make of all this? Eleanor Roosevelt is remembered as a champion of human rights, a humanitarian, and one of the most influential figures of the 20th century. But thanks to these letters, we now know she was also a woman in search of love, intimacy, and understanding. Lorena Hickok was the person who gave her that. Their letters reveal not just their bond, but also the profound humanity of one of America's most iconic figures. And maybe that's the point. History isn't clean, it's messy, human, and full of contradictions. Well, that's all the time we have for today. Thank you for joining me on this journey into Eleanor and Hick's world. If you loved this story, please share it with your friends and check out my other shows. Next time, we'll explore the untold story of a historical figure whose life was far more complicated than you ever imagined. Until then, I'm Dr. Wisdom, reminding you to stay curious, know your history, and stay wise.